I have written a book entitled Winning with People. In your notes, I would like to point you to the thesis as we begin the foundation of how you and I can have and develop great relationships with others. The thesis of the book is very simple, but it's also very powerful. People can usually trace their successes and failures to relationships in their lives. That's an absolute fact. If you would look at your successes or your failures, I would almost guarantee you every time something good has happened to you or every time something difficult has happened to you, you could point it back to some relationship that you've had in life. For example, our successes. In my book on the laws of teamwork, I talk about the law of significance that says one is too small of a number to achieve greatness. And basically what I say in that law is simple. If you and I are going to achieve something that's worthy and worthwhile and is something that is an achievement, I will almost guarantee you it will be done with someone else, not just by ourselves. It's also true in our failures. In your notes, I talk about the fact that 7 out of 10 people lose their jobs because of personality conflicts. Think about it. Think about people that you've had to let go in your office, or perhaps maybe at a time in the past you've had to be let go. I will almost guarantee you it's some kind of a personality conflict. I have a minor degree in counseling, and I've done a little bit of it, not a lot. But I can tell you this. If you're sitting down counseling people, almost all the time, it's in some area of relationships. Somebody's struggling with somebody, somebody's having a difficult time with someone. It's almost always a relationship issue. In your notes, Kim Hemphill said this: with all the emphasis on improved education in America, you might think knowledge is the greatest asset for vocational success. The Carnegie Foundation discovered relational skills are far more important if you hope to succeed at work. Their study found that only 15% of a person's success is determined by job knowledge and technical skills. 85% is determined by an individual's attitude and ability to relate to other people. Recently, I was amused by some of the resumes that I saw in Forbes magazine. It was kind of almost like a, can you believe that people would put this on your resume type of an article. And I thought, since this is a relationship lesson, and I've written a relationship book, I thought I would just share with you a few of these resumes. You're just not going to believe them. For example, these are real resumes, okay? People applying for real jobs. People saying things like, it's best for employers if I don't work with people. Now, there's one to hire, isn't it, huh? Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, we'll put you over here in the corner and you'll never see anybody. We don't want to have people involved in your life. Here's another one. The company made me a scapegoat, just like my previous employers. Absolutely. I'm the scapegoat. Here's one. Note, please don't misconstrue my 14 jobs as job hopping. I have never quit a job. One more. I love this one. References? None. I've left a path of destruction behind me. The book is entitled Winning with People, Discover the People Principles That Work Every Time. Now, when you look at that book and you realize that I say discover the people principles that work every time, I didn't say, and I want to make sure you understand it, I didn't say discover the people principles that work every time for everybody. I didn't say discover the people principles that work for others every time. I did say discover the people principles that work for you every time. Because, two things in your notes, these people principles will help you better understand others. And two, they will help you better understand yourself. The result, the daily practice of these people principles will improve your people skills with everyone. Note, I did not say everyone would like you. That's impossible. You see, we cannot always determine how others will respond to us. We can always determine how we will respond to others. So therefore, note, when I respond correctly to you, I win. That's what these people principles will teach you. They'll teach you how to respond correctly to others. When others respond correctly to me, we win. What I'm concerned about is not how other people relate to you. I'm concerned about how you relate to others. A long time ago, I learned that I cannot control the actions or the reactions of others. But if I understand people correctly and if I have good people skills, I can control mine. And I can determine not how they feel about me, but I can determine how I feel about them. In fact, one time I shared with someone, I said, I have no enemies. And they looked at me and said, well, how could you have no enemies? Being a leader like you are and a strong leader and building organizations, you've got to have a lot of people that aren't happy with you. I said, oh, no, I didn't say a lot of people were unhappy with me. I have no enemies. See, how you treat me, that's your choice. How I treat you, that's my choice. If you don't like me, that's your choice. I'll still choose to like you. Too many times, we underestimate the power of personal choice. And when I talk about how these people principles will help you to win with people, what I know is if you have the right attitude with the right relationship skills and the proper understanding of people, you will always win. In your notes. In life, the skills you use and the people you choose will make or break you. I've divided the people principles in this book according to 5 critical questions that we must ask ourselves if we want to win with people. Number 1 is readiness. Are we prepared for relationships? Number 2, connection. Are we willing to focus on others? 3 is trust. Can we build mutual trust? 4, investment. Are we willing to invest in others? And finally, number 5, synergy. Can we create a win-win relationship? I want to talk to you first of all today about readiness. Are we prepared for relationships? Now, in this readiness level of relationships, there are 5 people principles. Number 1, the lens principle. The lens principle says who we are determines how we view others. I love the Groucho Marx comment. I wouldn't want to belong to any club that would accept me as a member. Says it all, doesn't it? You see, the question I must ask myself is, what is my perception of others? Because who you are determines the way you see everything. You cannot separate your identity from your perspective. All that you are and every experience that you've had color how you see things. It's in your lens. Here's what I mean. Number 1, who you are determines what you see. A Coloradan moved to Texas and built a house with a large picture window from which he could view hundreds of miles of rangeland. When asked how he enjoyed the view, he responded, the only problem is there's nothing to see. About the same time, a Texan moved to Colorado and built a house with a large picture window overlooking the Rockies. When asked how he liked it, he said, the only problem with this place is that you can't see anything because all those mountains are in your way. Who you are determines how you see. I was having dinner the other day with Francis Hesselbein, and I was also having time with Jim Collins, having a wonderful, really 3-hour dinner in that process. And because Francis has been with Peter Drucker for many, many years, I asked her what was the greatest thing that he ever taught her. She said that he has said to her many, many times, Francis, look out of the window and see things that are within your view that others do not see. What Peter Drucker was basically saying is, we all can look at the same thing, but we don't all see the same thing. We're going to see according to who we are. For example of that, my wife Margaret, very aware of what people wear. I am not. Many times we'll be at a party together and she'll say, you know, you were talking to the guy in the blue sweater. What was he talking about this evening? And I'll look at her and I'll say, what blue sweater? I can't relate. Now, she sees the person with the blue sweater. That's how she views people, by how they dress, what clothes they have on. Personally, that's nothing that really grabs hold of me. Now, see, she looks at a person entirely different than I look at a person. Who we are determines what we see. Number two, who you are determines how you see others. It's a classic old story of two guys, separate families that were moving into a little town, and on one day, one of the guys who was moving into town stopped at the local hardware store and said, "I've got to ask you a question." He said, "How are the people of this town?" And the owner of the hardware store looked at him and said, "Well, let me ask you a question. How were the people from the town that you came from?" He said, "Oh," he said, "they weren't very friendly." He said, "In fact, that's why I'm really glad to be moving to this town." And the guy at the hardware store said, "You know, I'm so sorry. They're not very friendly here either." A couple days later, another guy dropped by the same hardware store, said, "I'm moving here." He said, "I got to ask you a question. How are the people of the town?" And again, the owner of the hardware store looked at him and said, "Let me ask you, how were the people in the town that you just left?" "Oh," he said, "we hated to leave. Those people were so friendly and so warm. We had great relationships." And the owner of the hardware store said, "I've got great news for you. They're friendly here also." You see, it's a fact. Who you are determines how you see others. The way people see others is a reflection of themselves. For example, if I'm a trusting person, I will see others as trustworthy. If I'm a critical person, I will see others as critical. If I'm a caring person, I will see others as compassionate. Phil McGraw had it right when he said, "You teach people how to treat you." That is a powerful statement. Number three, who you are determines how you view life. I have the privilege of speaking to a lot of NFL teams. And one of the teams I've done a lot of work with is the St. Louis Rams. And I have a wonderful friend on the Rams team who is an offensive coach named John Matsko. And recently I was at a Rams game, and I was sitting with his wife, Kim, and some of the wives of the other coaches on the St. Louis team. And I know for a fact, because I've known John for probably 15, 18 years, that they've lived in at least 7 or 8 different cities. Kind of being a coach, they move from city to city and are coaching with different teams. And so I said, "Kim," I said, "I've got to ask you a question. Of all the cities you've lived in," I said, "what's your favorite city?" And she said to me, she said, "Well, where I am right now." I said, "Oh, you like St. Louis better than any other cities that you ever lived in?" She said, "I didn't say that." You asked me what my favorite city is, and she said, "My favorite city is where I am right now." What Kim was really saying to me that day was, where you live, who you're around, basically, you're going to determine how you view people by how you are yourself. And Kim was saying, I have a good attitude about wherever I am, and so therefore I like wherever I am. Number 4, who you are determines what you do. The question I've always asked myself is, what determines who I am and who you are? Well, number 1 is genetics, no doubt about that. My wife and I have had the privilege of adopting 2 children. They're now grown, married, and we have 4 grandchildren from them. And they were great delights to us. But when I and Margaret adopted them, many, many, many years ago, I was about 85% an environmentalist and about a 15% genetics. Now, having raised 2 adopted children, I'm about 85% genetics and about 15% environment. It's kind of like when I was a pastor and didn't have any children, I had great lessons on how to raise your kids. Then I had some and went into about a 20-year silence. But who we are, major genetic issues. Number 2, self-image. He was exactly right when T.S. Eliot said, half of the harm that is done in this world is due to people who want to feel important. They do not mean to do harm. They are absorbed in the endless struggle to think well of themselves. Number 3, experiences in life. Basically, the experiences that you and I have do mold us. And I would say this, we've all heard it said that experience is the best teacher. But I'm here to tell you it isn't. Never has been. I've known all kind of people who have had all kind of experience, and they haven't learned anything. Just because you're getting older doesn't mean you're getting better. Evaluated experience is the best teacher. The ability to look at where you have been and what you have done and pull back and reflect and evaluate, that's the instructor of our life. Number 4, attitude. Attitudes and choices about those experiences determine what you and I do. Number 5, friends. The friends that we associate with have a great determining factor on who we are and what we do. I close with this paragraph on people principle number 1, the lens principle. The way you view others is determined by who you are. You cannot get away from that truth. If you don't like people, that really is a statement about you and the way that you look at people. Who you are determines how you view others. Your viewpoint is the problem. If that's the case, don't try to change others. Don't even focus on others. Focus on yourself. If you change yourself and become the kind of person you desire to be, you will begin to view others in a whole new light. And that will change the way you interact in all of your relationships. People principle number 2. The mirror principle. The mirror principle says the first person we must examine is ourselves. And coping with difficult people, I love this quote, coping with difficult people is always a problem, especially if the difficult person happens to be you. And the question I must ask myself, have I examined myself and taken responsibility for who I am? Here's how the mirror test works. People unaware of who they are and what they do often damage relationships with others. The way to change that is to look in the mirror. It is something all of us must do. It's what I call taking the mirror test. Consider these truths that we must learn about ourselves. Number 1, the first person I must know is myself. That speaks of our self-awareness. Human nature seems to endow people with the ability to size up everybody in the world but themselves. That is so true. As I have worked and talked and counseled with people, they're a much better evaluator of others than they are of themselves. Because you see, we judge others by their actions and we judge ourselves by our motives. We know what we intend to do, what we would want to do, what we feel and what we would like to have done. Number 2, the first person I must get along with is myself. This deals with my self-image. Sidney Harris observed, if you're not comfortable with yourself, you can't be comfortable with others. I would take that one step farther. If you do not believe in yourself, you will sabotage relationships. Most of you are aware, because I wrote the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, that I talk about the law of the lid. The law of the lid basically says that if this hand is my leadership skill, then this lid, this leadership skill and effectiveness will determine how I can grow my organization or how I can develop my department, etc. That there's a lid, a leadership lid that keeps us from expanding or growing. I would just stop and say to you, that's true about relationships also. There's a relationship lid that keeps us from expanding and growing in our knowledge and understanding and connection with and relationship with others. And it deals with this right here. If you can't get along with yourself, if you have a poor self-image, I can promise you, you'll never get along with a lot of people, and you'll never be able to believe in them because you don't believe in yourself. Number 3, the first person to cause me problems is myself. That's self-honesty. Or as comedian Jack Parr quipped, looking back, my life seems like one big obstacle race with me being the chief obstacle. I did a tape one time, a leadership tape, entitled How to Get Out of Your Own Way. And basically the thesis of the tape was, don't worry about competition. Most people never get sidetracked with competition or beat up by competition. They just blow themselves up. Most people, if you just let them alone, it's only a matter of time till they go into the ditch. We can't even run a race sometimes with ourselves because of the self-image, because of this whole process of the mirror principle and unable to cope with who we really are. Number 4, the first person I must change is myself. This deals with self-improvement. In the crypts of Westminster Abbey, the following words were written on the tomb of an Anglican bishop who lived in the 11th century. When I was young and free, my imagination had no limits, and I dreamed of changing the world. As I grew older and wiser, I discovered the world would not change, so I shortened my sights somewhat and decided to change only my country. But it too seemed immovable. As I grew in my twilight years, in one last desperate attempt, I settled for changing only my family, those closest to me. But alas, they would have none of it. And now as I lie on my deathbed, I suddenly realized if I had only changed myself first, then by example I would have changed my family, and from their inspiration and encouragement, I would have been able to better my country, and who knows, I may have even changed my world. Number 5, the first person that can make a difference is myself. This deals with self-responsibility. In the 17 indisputable laws of teamwork, I wrote about the law of significance, that one is too small of a number to achieve greatness. I truly believe that no significant accomplishment can be achieved by individual effort. However, I also believe that every significant accomplishment begins with the vision of one individual. That person not only possesses the vision, but also takes responsibility for carrying it out to others. If you want to make a difference in this world, you must take responsibility for yourself. A couple of years ago, I was going to Australia to speak at a conference, and Margaret and I stopped for a couple of days at Christchurch, New Zealand. Beautiful country. The first morning when we got up at our hotel, Margaret and I both love Diet Coke in the morning to kind of get that caffeine, get that blood flowing for you. And so I went on a search to find some Diet Coke, which I couldn't find any Diet Coke and couldn't find any ice. And I'm wandering the halls, and I see this door that basically says staff only. And me being the kind of person I am, I assumed that back there is the ice, and back there probably is some Diet Cola, and I raised my right hand, made myself a staff member, and entered the door. And looked around, and there was no Diet Coke, there was no ice. I'm about to leave this little area that was for staff only, and I look at the door that I'm about to open to walk out, and there's a full-length mirror. And at the top of the full-length mirror, it had these words: take a good look at yourself. What you see, the customer is about to see. And as I looked at that little mirror and I saw those words, I said to myself, every day I would like to tell people, before you go out into the world, look in the mirror. Take a good look at yourself, because who you are is how you'll see others. What you represent by your actions, by your face, is going to have a lot to determine on how well you relate to people. Now, a lot of times, people, when they look in the mirror, they don't want to face reality. They're like the guy with a health problem. And he says, Doc, could you just touch up the x-rays? Could you just kind of work on those a little bit? It's not an x-ray issue. It's something that you and I have to do as we look in the mirror. People principle number 3, the pain principle. The pain principle says, hurting people hurt people and are easily hurt by them. This is the connection level, which asks the question, are we willing to focus on others? And there are 6 people principles in it. Number 6, the big picture principle. The big picture principle says the entire population of the world, with one minor exception, is composed of others. And the question I must ask myself, do I have a hard time putting others first? When it comes to winning with people, everything begins with the ability to think about people other than ourselves. That is the most basic principle in building relationships. I know that may sound like common sense, yet not everyone gets the big picture or practices unselfishness. Instead, Too many people act more like toddlers do, whose perspective is something like this. If I like it, it's mine. If I can take it away from you, it's mine. If I had it a while ago, it's mine. If I say it is mine, it's mine. If it looks like mine, it's mine. If I saw it first, it's mine. If you're having fun with it, it's definitely mine. If you lay it down, it's mine, and if it's broken, it's yours. Seeing the big picture requires the following. Number one, perspective. People who lack perspective are like Lucy in the Peanuts comic strip by Charles Schulz. In one strip, while Lucy swings on the playground, Charlie Brown reads to her. It says here that the world revolves around the sun once a year. Lucy stops abruptly and responds, "The world revolves around the sun? Are you sure? I thought it revolved around me." Early in my career, I really made this relational mistake. Because early in my career, as I would go to the group of people that I was leading, the first question I would always ask myself is, how can these people help me? First question. Boy, I wonder how I can motivate these people to see my vision. I wonder how I can really get them on my train and get them on the bandwagon. I wonder how long is it going to take before I can get those people to really come alongside of me. The leader's first question is not how can those people help me, but how can I help those people? For us to see the big picture, number two, maturity. There has to be some maturity in our life. Now, every once in a while, I'll talk to young people about this, and somebody will come alongside and say, well, you know, they're young. Give them some time. You know, you've got to give them some time. And it's very true. A lot of times, young people are immature. But I've not really discovered that maturity accompanies age. Sometimes age comes alone. I know a lot of people that are getting older, but they're not getting better. Now, our two oldest granddaughters, Maddie is 4 and Hannah will be 4 very soon. They spent a week with us, and both Hannah and Maddie kind of think that I am their personal servant. And they get up every morning and they have their whole list of things to do for me. Papa, let's get on the golf cart. Let's go chase the ducks. Let's go to the playground. And let's go to the snack hut, Papa. And we go over to the snack hut, and I'll mess up their appetite for lunch. And then everybody wonders why they're not hungry. But we don't talk about that. There are some things you don't tell the other people in the room. Those hot dogs are a lot better than what they're going to have at the lunch anyway. They were with us for a whole week. And I mean, every day, they could hardly wait to get up and have me do something for them. Not one time, I kid you not one time in 7 days did Hannah or Maddie come up to me and said, Papa, we've been talking. You do so much for us. What could we do for you today? Not one time did it enter those 4-year-old girls' mind that they should do anything for me. And that's okay. They're 4. It's very sad when you're 40 and you still think like that. That's why I used Bob Buford's diagram in his book, Halftime, that shows you basically 2 ways that people have their lives. And if you look at those 2 kind of circles, one is going inward and one is going outward. And in your notes, while the first half self is small, the second half self is large. The first half self winds inward, wrapping tighter and tighter around itself, and the second half winds outward, unraveling itself from the paralysis of a tightly wound spring. The small self contains only you. It's basically alienated and alone and pathologically individualistic. The larger self is whole because it is bonded with something transcendent. Self-transcendence has legs. It goes the distance and completes the race. So to see the big picture, perspective, maturity, and number 3, responsibility. I have there a recipe in your notes for a miserable life. These are words about emotional poverty and self-centeredness. Here's the recipe for a miserable life. Think about yourself. Talk about yourself. Use I as often as possible. Mirror yourself continually in the opinion of others. Listen greedily to what people say about you. Expect to be appreciated. Be suspicious. Be jealous and envious. Be sensitive to slights. Never forgive a criticism. Trust nobody but yourself. Insist on consideration and respect. Demand agreement with your own views on everything. Sulk if people are not grateful to you for favors shown to them. Never forget a service you may have rendered. Be on the lookout for a good time for yourself. Shirk your duties if you can. Do as little as possible for others. Love yourself supremely. Be selfish. For some of us, we can put a picture right there, can't we? We can put a face right there. People, principle number 7, the exchange principle. The exchange principle says, instead of putting others in their place, we must put ourselves in their place. Sometimes when you give a person a piece of your mind, you lose your own peace of mind. And the question I must ask myself is, do I try to see things from others' point of view? Here's what I've discovered about the exchange principle. Number 1, we naturally do not see ourselves and others from the same perspective. Longfellow was right when he said, we judge ourselves by what we feel capable of doing, while others judge us by what we have already done. I came across a piece called Whose Point of View that captures our nature and describes it well. When the other fellow takes a long time, he's slow. When I take a long time, I'm thorough. When the other fellow doesn't do it, he's lazy, but when I don't do it, I'm busy. When the other fellow does something without being told, he's overstepping his bounds, but when I do it, that's initiative. When the other fellow overlooks a rule of etiquette, he's rude. When I skip a few rules, I'm original. When the other fellow pleases the boss, he's an apple polisher, but when I please the boss, well, now that's cooperation. When the other fellow gets ahead, he's getting all the breaks, but when I manage to get ahead, that's just the reward for hard work. Perspective. Whose point of view? Number 2, when we fail to see things from the perspective of others, we fail in our relationships. In other words, when we fail the exchange principle, when we fail to put ourselves in the place of others, almost always relationships deteriorate. And I love this piece called The Hot Air Balloon. A man in a hot air balloon realized that he was lost. He reduced altitude, spotted a woman below. He descended a bit more and shouted, "Excuse me, can you help me? I promised a friend I would meet him an hour ago, but I don't know where I am." The woman below replied, "You are in a hot air balloon, hovering approximately 30 feet above the ground. You're between 40 and 41 degrees north altitude and between 59 and 60 degrees west longitude." "You must be an engineer," said the balloonist. "I am," replied the woman. "How did you know?" "Well," answered the balloonist, "everything you told me is technically correct, but I have no idea what to make of your information. And the fact is, I'm still lost. Frankly, you've not been much help at all. If anything, you've delayed my trip." The woman below responded, "You must be in management." "I am," replied the balloonist, "but how did you know?" "Well," said the woman, "you don't know where you are or where you're going. You've risen to where you are due to a large quantity of hot air. You made a promise which you have no idea how to keep, and you expect people beneath you to solve your problems. The fact is, you are in exactly the same position you were before we met, but now somehow you've managed to make it my fault." Now, how do we see things from another person's perspective? Okay, let's see if we can get real practical here. Number 1, leave your place and visit their place. Literally, exchange places. For example, many years ago, before I traveled a lot internationally, I used to think that if you just worked hard, you could prosper. Then I started going to developing countries. And I saw people work a lot harder than I work, a lot harder than the average American work. And all of a sudden I realized when I got to their place and saw it where they lived, hard work was not going to bring prosperity to them. Harry Truman said, when we understand the other fellow's viewpoint, understand what he is trying to do, 9 times out of 10, he is trying to do right. I love to play a game. My wife and I play word games. And I love word games. And one of the games we love to play is Boggle. We play advanced Boggle. We don't play the simple stuff. And basically you shake up letters and then you have to make words out of them. And what's interesting is everybody's looking at the same letters. I mean, it's not like Scrabble where you have an advantage if you have better letters than someone else, and sometimes you just pick bad letters, and so therefore you're kind of stuck. Everybody's looking at the same letters. It's so revealing. Because after your 3-minute time limit, people will have different words out of those letters, and all of a sudden you'll start to see them, but you didn't see them until somebody begins to point them out, and all of a sudden it's right in front of me. But what we do about halfway through the game is we turn the Boggle around, just so we can see those letters from a different perspective. It's amazing what happens when you just leave your place and go around to the other side and look at the same thing. Number 2, acknowledge that the other person has a valid viewpoint. Please don't be arrogant enough to think that there's only one viewpoint and that it's yours, and that's the right one. Number 3, check your attitude. So much of the problem is based on wrong attitude. And 4, ask others what they would do in your situation. This is a great way to do the exchange principle. In your notes, Saturday Review article, Ann Landers tells what she has learned about people through the letters that she has received. She said, since I began writing this column, I have learned plenty, including, most meaningfully, what Leo Roston had in mind when he said, each of us is a little lonely deep inside and cries to be understood. I have learned how it is with the stumbling, tortured people in this world who have nobody to talk to. The fact that the column has been a success underscores for me at least the central tragedy of society, the disconnectedness, the insecurity, the fear that bedevils, cripples, and paralyzes so many of us. I have learned that financial success, academic achievement, and social or political status open no doors to peace of mind or inner security. We are all wanderers like sheep on this planet. People principle number 8, the learning principle. The learning principle says, each person we meet has potential to teach us something. Or as Louis Armstrong said, there are some people that if they don't know, you can't tell them. And the question I must ask myself, do I approach people with a desire to learn from them? 3 attitudes about learning from others. Number 1, no one can teach me anything. That's an arrogant attitude. The reality is that no one is too old, too smart, or too successful to learn something new. The only thing that can come between a person and the ability to learn and improve is a bad attitude. I can remember in one of my transitions in my career of going and spending quite a bit of time before I took this leader's place, spending time with him. And one of the things that was very apparent in my first visit out to where I was going, in my first visit with him, was the fact that he was very proud of who they were, what they had accomplished. They had some success. And basically he said, the difficult thing is I have nowhere to send my staff because my staff basically knows it all. And I thought, oh my goodness, we're in real deep weeds here. And because of this attitude that no one can teach me something, he and the staff had stopped, oh my goodness, for at least 12 years, learning and growing. But I see a lot of people who basically say, nobody can teach me anything. A second attitude about learning from others is the person who says, someone can teach me everything. And that's a naive attitude. When you think that someone can teach you everything, there is major naiveness there. In fact, I would say this. Over the last 10 years, mentoring has been very big. And people, well, every day want me to be their mentor. Or people ask me every day, who is your mentor? And I tell them I don't have a mentor. I don't mean this unkindly. I've not met anybody yet that's so smart in every area and has so much wisdom in every area that they can be my mentor. Now, I have a lot of people that mentor me. I have a lot of people who really come alongside of me and help me and give me their wisdom and teach me out of their experiences. And I have probably 12 or 15 mentors, but I don't have one mentor. I think it's very naive. And I think it's not only naive, I think you set yourself up for major failure when you think one person can teach you everything. And I always worry about the mentor who thinks he can teach you everything. I want to go up and say, is anybody home? And is anybody home? Because I think part of wisdom and part of maturing is the more that we know, the more we know that we don't know. Isn't that true? When I was young, I offered advice on everything. As I've gotten older, the list has been greatly reduced, along with the humbling of the experiences of life. So the two attitudes, I think they're both not good ones. The arrogant attitude, no one can teach me anything, and the naive attitude, someone can teach me everything. I think they're both wrong. I think number 3 is right. Everyone can teach me something. And I think that's a teachable attitude or a spirit. In other words, every person I meet, if I search out and seek out and ask questions and really desire to understand and learn, everybody I meet has something that they can teach me. So how do you learn from others? Number 1, make learning your passion. Philip Crosby says, there's a theory of human behavior that says people subconsciously retard their own intellectual growth. They come to rely on cliches and habits. Wow. Once they reach the age of their own personal comfort with the world, they stop learning and their mind runs on idle for the rest of their days. They may progress organizationally, they may be ambitious and eager, and they may even work night and day, but they learn no more. If you desire to keep growing, you cannot sit back in a comfort zone. You need to make learning your goal. Do that and you will never run out of gas mentality. And your motivation will be strong. And don't worry about having people to teach you. Greek philosopher Plato said, when the pupil is ready, the teacher will appear. So how do you learn from others? Make learning your passion. Number 2, value people. Value people. I can still remember as a young man an experience I had where I went to a conference to listen to 3 major speakers that I just felt would help me tremendously, and the 3 major speakers did a very good job. But they had what they called an idea exchange, where they put about 500 of us in a room, and we shared ideas. And I'll never forget, as I sat there for 2 hours writing ideas down from other people who were sitting at tables with me, I came away and I realized that day that the 3 experts that I went to hear helped me, but oh my goodness, the idea exchange was so much better for me. And I walked out there that day and I said to myself, I have made a mistake. I place way too high value on the experts and way too little value on fellow travelers in the same journey. And it was out of that I began to just value people and value what I could learn from them. Number 3, develop relationships with growth potential. It is true that everyone has something to teach us, but that doesn't mean that anyone can teach us everything we want to learn. We've already talked about that. We need to find people who are especially likely to help us grow. experts in our field, creative thinkers who will stretch us mentally, achievers who will inspire us to go to the next level. Learning is often the reward for spending time with remarkable people. Who they are and what they know will rub off. As Clifton and Nelson said, relationships help us define who we are and what we become. I have made it a habit in my life to every month have what I call a learning lunch. And every month, I seek out people, most of whom I have never met. It may be an author of a book that's going to be in a town where I'm going to go, and I've read their book, and I'll call and ask if I can have a lunch with them. But every month, I have a learning lunch, at least one. Sometimes I get 2 or 3 in, but always have one. I always set up one for sure. I mean, get that one nailed down. And in that learning lunch, I have a series of questions. I referred to in another lesson of having dinner with Jim Collins and Francis Hesselbein. I kid you not. I prepared 4 hours for that lunch. And when I went to the table, you see, most people, when they go to the table, they think they should eat food. I can eat food anywhere. I've got my questions. You eat the food, I'll ask the questions. And I asked the first question to Jim Collins. I said, would you talk to me about the value of curiosity? Because in your book, especially Good to Great, your curiosity is evident everywhere. I said, what is the value of curiosity? It took him 12 minutes to answer that question. He said, John, no one's ever asked me that question. He said, I love that question. He answered it. I went through others for him and for Francis. Every once in a while, they'd ask me a question. I'd give them a real quick, simple, stupid answer and get right back to asking them questions, because I learned a long time ago, if you're doing talking, you're not doing any learning. We're in the car, and we're going back to the hotel, and Jim Collins turns around, looks back at me. So let me talk to you a little bit more about curiosity in another 5 minutes. And I'm just sitting there taking notes. Some of my best thinking has been done by others. It's amazing what will happen if you have those learning lunches. Number 4, identify people's uniqueness and strengths. Ralph Waldo Emerson remarked, I have never met a man who was not my superior in some particular. People grow best in the areas of their strengths, and you can learn most from another person's area of strength. So what you got to do is identify your strengths and ask the questions in their strength zone. Number 5, ask questions. Just have a learning value. The learning principle is huge. And I have watched people and realized that if you really want to develop strong relationships, ask questions and learn from people. And by the way, you create tremendous value when you're asking somebody to teach you something. People principle number 9. The charisma principle. The charisma principle says people are interested in the person who is interested in them. Or Dale Carnegie, the classic statement of all, I think. You can make more friends in 2 months by becoming interested in other people than you can in 2 years by trying to get other people interested in you. The question I must ask myself, do I usually focus on others and their interest or on my own? Many years ago, a person that I've had the privilege of mentoring, Dan Ryland, and I were having a discussion. And he said to me, he said, John, you have charisma. And I said, well, people tell me that. But I said, I think that's just kind of a gift that some people have, some people don't. And he stopped. He said, no, you're wrong. I said, what do you mean I'm wrong? He said, charisma is not a gift. It's not a talent at all. It's a mindset. I said, what do you mean? And that day, he taught me a very valuable lesson about charisma. In your notes, people with charisma focus on others. That's what makes people like them. And people without charisma focus on themselves. It's a mindset. If you are focusing on others, I promise you, you'll develop a charismatic personality. If you focus on yourselves, hello. This is classic. This is Dale Carnegie, 6 Ways to Make People Like You. Carnegie's teachings in the class and in How to Win Friends and Influence People made a profound impression on me as a teenager. By the time I graduated, I had, with my father, taken 2 Dale Carnegie courses. In fact, they had such an impact that I've worked to pattern my people skills on much of what he taught. And here are 6 things Carnegie suggests, along with my explanation. Number 1, become genuinely interested in other people. People do not care how much you know until they know how much you care. Number 2, smile. You say, John, there's got to be more to it than that. No, really there isn't. Just smile. And people all the time will come to me and say, you know what, John, you just have this natural smile. You just, no, I don't. No. I don't have a natural smile. You don't have a natural smile. Nobody has a natural smile. We had to work our way out into this world. Think about it. And as soon as we got out, the doctor looked at us and smacked us. No wonder we are negative the rest of our life. Now we go to the 3rd level of relationships, which is the trust level. Can we build mutual trust? At this level, there are 5 people principles. Number 12, the bedrock principle. The bedrock principle basically says trust is the foundation of any relationship. George MacDonald said it right when he said, it is a greater compliment to be trusted than to be loved. And the question is, that I must ask myself, am I a trustworthy person? Warren Bennis says, integrity is the basis of trust, which is not so much an ingredient of leadership as it is a product. It is the one quality that cannot be acquired, but must be earned. It is given by co-workers and followers, and without it, the leader cannot function. So 3 truths about trust. Number 1, trust begins with yourself. That's why Shakespeare wrote, this above all, to thine own self be true, and it must follow as the night the day. Thou canst not then be false to any man. If you're not honest with yourself, you will not be capable of honesty with others. Self-deception is the enemy of relationships. It also undermines personal growth. If a person does not admit his shortcomings, he cannot improve them. Goes back to a principle we've already learned, the mirror principle. The first person we must examine is ourselves. Trust begins with yourself. Number 2, trust cannot be compartmentalized. Cheryl Beale, the wife and friend of a friend and author Bob Beale, says, one of the realities of life is that if you can't trust a person at all points, you can't trust him or her at any point. Goes back to a book I wrote, There's No Such Thing as Business Ethics. Why? Because there's no such thing as business ethics. There's just ethics. You can't compartmentalize ethics. You can't compartmentalize trust. You can't look at your people that work with you and say, you can trust me, and go home with your family and say, you can't trust me. It's got to be trust in all areas. Thirdly, trust works like a bank account. Mike Abershoff, author of It's Your Ship, states, trust is like a bank account. You have got to keep making deposits if you want it to grow. On occasions, things will go wrong and you have to make a withdrawal. Meanwhile, it is sitting in the bank earning interest. It's a great comparison. You've got trust is like a bank account. You've got to be putting something in. And if you and I use the phrase, it's like coins in my pocket. It's like change in my pocket. And I'm either gathering change and having more, or else I'm losing change. And here's what I want you to understand in this area of trust. When you and I fail, if we have been trustworthy and we have made a lot of deposits, we have something we can lean on that will get us through it. But if we're low on our trust change, and we do something wrong, we're bankrupt. So questions to ask yourself. Questions such as, am I making deposits? Think about your most important relationships. Are you exhibiting trustworthy behavior that's putting relational money in the bank? Am I making withdrawals? Have you undermined trust in any of these important relationships? If so, you need to try to make things right. Don't wait another minute to take the appropriate action by doing the following. In other words, if you are withdrawing and you're losing trust, number one, apologize. Number two, ask yourself why you broke trust. Spend some time with yourself. And I would also say, if you can't figure that out, go to someone who cares much for you and ask them, why have I broken this trust? Number three, correct the trust issue in your life. Once you have discovered why you have broken a trust, now let's make some real effort to correct this issue in your life. Number four, boy, this one is so true. Recognize that it takes longer to restore trust than to lose it. You lose trust, I lose trust quickly. And when I do lose trust, it takes a long time to restore it. Again, in my counseling with people in the area of relationships, that's one of the reasons I've always said, have relationships that are always trustworthy, because if you break that trust in a relationship, you can break that trust very quickly, but it takes a long time to rebuild it. Number five, remember, trust is restored by deeds, not just words. In other words, doing these things won't earn you new change, but it may stop you from losing more. And you just might save a relationship. A great question to ask is this one. Am I compounding my trust? Mike Krzyzewski, the head coach in basketball at Duke University, offers this advice. If you set up an atmosphere of communication and trust, it becomes a tradition. Older team members will establish your credibility with newer ones. And even if they don't like everything about you, they still say he's trustworthy, he's committed to us in a team. Back in 1978, I had a friend that has been one of my mentors throughout life. His name is Tom Philippi. And I was very, very young and starting to get a little bit of success. And Tom sat down with me one day, I'll never forget, over dinner, and he said, John, he says, you're doing good. And he said, you're going to do very well. And he said, one of the issues that you're going to have that will be the most difficult as you get successful is you're going to always be asking yourself, who can I trust? Why are they around me? What do they want? What's in it for them? And I'll never forget, he looked at me and he said, I just want you to know that as you journey in your life, I will always be a trustworthy person for you. You will always be able to trust me. And now that was said to me, oh my goodness, that was said to me in the 70s. That was said to me 30 years ago. And I have found that Tom to be exactly that kind of a friend. It's been tested. His trust has been tested dozens of times. And he's never violated it. And it's been a great encouragement to me to be also that kind of a trustworthy friend to someone else, somebody that they can just trust. In closing on this people principle, writer and chaplain to Queen Victoria, Charles Kingsley, said, a blessed thing it is for any man or woman to have a friend, one human soul, whom we can trust utterly. I love this phrase right here. Who knows the best and the worst of us, and who loves us in spite of all of our faults. Whew. That's a major statement. People principle number 13. The situation principle. Never let the situation mean more than the relationship. The question I must ask myself is, do I sometimes put the situation ahead of my relationship? I one time had a friend of mine tell me it's more rewarding to resolve a situation than it is to dissolve a relationship, and that is so very, very true. You know, when you and I take our marriage vows and we get married, of course, again, you can talk no sense into them. So they're just holding hands and thinking about the wedding cake, and it's hello. But there's a reason in those vows that we talk about for better or worse, for richer, for poor. Now you see, again, I don't think they do any good because we're all thinking for better, for richer. I mean, it's just kind of worthless. But you're trying to help them understand there is a downside in making commitments. Now, the good news is, although you can't do much about it that day, they will very quickly find the other side. They'll very quickly realize that there's as much worse sometimes as there is better, and that life is difficult. Now, here's what I want you to understand. Situations that occur, it's those situations and how we handle those situations that will either draw us closer in our relationship or it will begin to separate us in that relationship. So in your notes, take a moment to think about your relationships, and now look at the following list and determine which words best describe them. And you can see the bad ones are on the left and the good ones are on the right. Volatile or steady, deceitful or open, selfish or mature, draining or refreshing, insecure or secure, manipulating or accepting, conditional or unconditional, breaking or bonding. The column on the left describes interaction where the relationship fluctuates with the situation. Boy, that's so true. The column on the right describes interaction where the relationship is rock solid regardless of the situation. In my book, Today Matters, I write, successful people make right decisions early, and then they manage those decisions daily. And to keep your perspective and prevent you from allowing the situation to become more important than the relationship, you can ask yourself several questions. I suggest you start with these 4. Do I see the big picture or just the bad picture? And number 2, do I communicate the big picture along with the bad one? I'll stop here just for a moment to say, I grew up in a wonderful home. I had tremendous parents. In fact, they're still alive. And I was an ornery kid. You find that would be very difficult for you to imagine that, but I was an ornery kid. I just, not like a bad kid. If you're high energy and you're creative, you just get in trouble. And I did. And my parents, before they would discipline me, I can still remember it so well. Because I'm going, here it comes. I'm going to get disciplined again. In fact, there are many times when I would be doing something saying, this will cost me. This will cost me. But it is so much fun. I'll pay the price. And before disciplining me, never, ever was I disciplined without them first talking about how unconditionally they loved me. Now, as a kid, my thing back to them was, if you love me, you won't discipline me. I think maybe there's a softness or an opening for debate here or negotiation, and I never won that one. 30 minutes after the discipline, without fail, hundreds of times this has happened, Mom or Dad would come around, hold me, love on me, and tell me how valuable I was and how important I was and how unconditionally they loved me. They sandwiched it. And I'm going to tell you something. My self-image and who I am and what I think about myself is wrapped up in that ability to see the big picture, to have a total perspective, to never allow the situation to become more important than the relationship. Question number 3. I see this happen so much. Do I make too many situations a life or death issue? Some families, some people at the workplace, just everything is life or death. And Dean Smith was so right. He used to be the coach at North Carolina, basketball coach. He said, if you make every game a life and death proposition, you'll be dead a lot. In other words, we need to pick our battles. I just see some people, they just get upset over the smallest of things. And what I've discovered about them is that almost always when people get upset over all the little things and make big things out of the little things, it's not the little things that's the problem. It's issues in their own heart that they've never resolved. Number 4, is this a one-time situation or an oft-repeated one? There's a big difference between a situation that occurs once and one that occurs again and again. Both affect the relationship and both require commitment. However, a recurring issue will need the commitment from all parties involved to sustain the relationship and ultimately change the situation. But if it's a one-time deal, be careful. Don't, again, let the situation mean more than the relationship. People principle number 14, the Bob principle. When Bob has a problem with everyone, Bob is usually the problem. Boy, that's the truth. Alexander Pope says, all seems infected, that the infected spy, as all looks yellow to the jaundiced eye. The question I must ask myself, am I Bob? Because it's so true. If Bob has a problem with everyone, usually Bob's the problem. And all of us, as we're taking these notes and listening to this relationship teaching, every one of us know Bob, don't we? Huh? I mean, just, no matter where he is, there are problems. Or, not always Bob, it can be Bobetta. So how do you know Bob when you see him? Number 1, Bob is a problem carrier. He just is. He carries problems with him. You have mail carriers, you understand? And every day they go and deliver the mail. We've got problem carriers. Every day they walk around delivering problems to people. As a young leader, again, having board meetings in the congregation that I was leading, it was just amazing. Every board meeting, there would be 3 or 4 of the board members that say, well, we're having a problem here, we're having a problem there. And I'll never forget, after doing this for about 5 or 6 months, I said, you know what, let's do, if we're going to represent somebody that says there's a problem, I said we have to say who it was. We just have to put a name with that problem. I'll never forget the next meeting when somebody said, well, there's a problem here. I'd say, who told you that? And they gave me a name. And I'll never forget, on the other side, the guy said, well, they told me that too. We discovered in a congregation of about 800, there were 11 people that were problem carriers. Every day they got up and delivered problems to certain people. And once we identified them and realized we were all carrying the problem mail for the problem carriers, we decided we weren't going to put it in our sack anymore. You understand? See, some people can find a solution in every problem, and there are a lot of people who can find a problem in every solution. They're problem carriers. Then Bob's not only a problem carrier, he's a problem finder. Oh, yes. Bob also likes to find problems and expose them to others. He subscribes to Chisholm's second law, which says, anytime things appear to be going better, you have overlooked something. Thirdly, Bob is a problem creator. Yes, he is. In fact, I've often said Now we're going to the investment level of relationships. Are we willing to invest in others? And there are 5 people principles in the investment stage. Number 17, the gardening principle. The gardening principle says all relationships need cultivation. Samuel Butler said, friendship is like money, easier made than kept. And the question I must ask myself, do I occasionally or continually cultivate my relationships? Let's look at some ways to keep cultivating important relationships. What does it mean to cultivate a relationship? Whether it's as a spouse, parent, or a friend, you can start to cultivate a healthy, growing relationship by focusing on the following 6 things. Number 1, commitment. Researcher Dr. Kinsey observed, there may be nothing more important in a marriage than a determination that it shall persist. With such determination, individuals force themselves to adjust and to accept situations which would otherwise seem sufficient grounds for breakup. Scott Peck wrote a classic work on human psychology in the late 1970s called The Road Less Traveled. This book really marked my life. Since that time, he has offered ever-increasing insights from his lengthy practice as a psychiatrist, and one of his points involves laziness. Dr. Peck says, laziness is a contributing cause of evil, a primary cause of psychological illness, and the main reason that Americans are increasingly failing at human relationships. He notes that meaningful relationships require commitment and work. Those who are lazy are seldom willing to expend that kind of energy. Many marriage counselors would concur that laziness is the major cause for failure of marriages. Too often people know what needs to be done to restore a relationship but won't put forth the effort. Relational sloth has become an epidemic that we must honestly address. Number 2, to cultivate a relationship, communication. Number 2 is communication. Just the ability to have a system to communicate. One of the things that helped me and my wife, Margaret, is early in my marriage, what I would catch myself doing is I'd catch myself working all day, and when I'd come home, she'd say, well, what happened? And I said, well, nothing. What do you mean, nothing? Well, all right, well, something happened, but nothing important happened. Well, you can tell this is not a good thing. So many, many years ago, I'm talking about, we've been doing this for, 25 years at least, is that during our day, if something happens that we just learn about, or something fun happens, or something funny happens, or something that wasn't good happens, but anything that happens that is kind of noteworthy, we take a card out and we write what it is. We just make a little note to ourselves. Now this is huge. 25 years ago, I made a commitment that if something happened that was noteworthy, I would not tell anybody about it until I told Margaret first. Because what happens is if you tell a dozen people what happened during the day, something, by the time you get home, it's old hat. The first time you've got all kind of energy. Isn't that true? And so, oh my goodness, guess what just happened? Now, you know what's interesting is, what that means is, not every day, but most days, I've got to call her in the middle of the day. Because something just happened, and I got to tell somebody. You follow me? And I call, I said, Margaret, 60 seconds, just guess what did, boy, you're kidding me. Oh, okay, we laugh, hang up. Now I can tell others. You have no idea what that's done to cultivate our relationship. She knows that she's not the last person in the food chain to hear. She does the same for me, by the way. Number 3, friendship. Obviously, to cultivate a relationship, there needs to be a friendship. Samuel Johnson remarked, if a man does not make new acquaintances as he advances through life, he will soon find himself left alone. A man, sir, should keep his friendship in constant repair. That goes for old friendships as well as new ones. I think we sometimes take for granted the people closest to us, and as a result, we neglect to try being good friends to them first. Number 4 is memories. To cultivate relationships, you want to create memories. I really work hard on this because here's what I believe. Here's what I believe about your children. I believe that your children won't remember what you bought them at Christmas time 20 years from now. Maybe they remember a key bike when they were 10 years old. They remember three or four. But can I tell you something? You'll buy them hundreds of things and they'll remember three or four. Because people forget things. But people don't forget memories. The experiences you do together are more important than anything else. And so I determined a long time ago to become a maker of memories. And I literally, every month, work on 2 or 3 things that I believe will create memories for maybe somebody I work with, perhaps somebody, maybe for Margaret, maybe for my kids. But I'm always working on memories. Because here's what I know. If we do something together, we experience something together, they'll never forget those experiences. My kids, when we lived in San Diego, we were away from most of our family, which was back east. So Margaret and I determined when our children were very small that we would go up to a little place about 45 minutes from our house called MAXWELL Village. And it had a little golf course and swimming pools and a place where you could fish and just all this stuff. And we decided that we would go and we'd get a little place there, a little timeshare there, and every year we'd go back to that same place. I was, the other day I was back, we were going up to Los Angeles to play golf, and I was with my son-in-law, Steve Miller. And when we passed the village, Steve, I didn't say anything about it. Steve said, let me tell you something. He said, every time we pass this village, your daughter, Elizabeth, my wife, goes back into length of telling me all the things that she's done there. Well, she's not forgotten them. To cultivate a relationship, create memories. Number 5, growth. To cultivate a relationship, there has to be growth. Benjamin Franklin said, promise may get friends, but it is performance that keeps them. When you begin any relationship, it is filled with promise, but you have to find ways to keep it fresh and strong so that it continues to have potential and not just good memories. One way to do that is to grow together. Make your growth intentional with your best friends. Number 6, spoiling each other. Just practice spoiling each other. Voltaire wrote, if the first law of friendship is that it has to be cultivated, the second law is to be indulgent when the first law has been neglected. Just spoil your friends. Do just wonderful things for them. People principle number 18. People principle number 18 is the 101% principle. The 101% principle says, find the 1% that we agree on and give it 100% of our effort. Darryl Zanuck says, if 2 men on the same job agree all the time, then one is useless. If they disagree all the time, then both are useless. And the question I must ask myself is, can I find common ground, and will I give it 100% of my effort? Now, when do I practice this 101% principle? It is an incredible tool in anyone's relational toolbox. However, it's not something that can be pulled out and used all the time. I say that because this principle takes a big commitment of time, energy, and thinking. Therefore, before practicing this principle, you need to ask yourself some questions. Now, I know that I'm a little vulnerable when I start helping you ask these questions, but this principle takes such time and effort, you have to ask these questions. Number 1, is the person worth the commitment? Every person has great worth, but they don't all have the same relational worth to you. So you have to ask yourself, where do I use this 101% principle? Where do I find that 1% we agree on and give it 100% of my effort? Because there's a lot of things we're disagreeing on. Well, family, inner circle people. But you can't give 100% commitment to 1% you agree on with everybody. So you have to kind of evaluate, who do I do this with? Number 2, is the situation worth the commitment? A lot of situations you don't have to do this 101% principle at all because it's just going to pass. It's just here and it's going to pass whether you give it a commitment or not. Number 3, is the issue worth the commitment? What is the issue? Is the issue worth you giving 100% of your commitment? And number 4, is the return worth the commitment? So let's talk about this 101% return. Practicing the 101% principle can benefit you in many ways. Here are 6. 1, it allows you to build a foundation for change. Why? It's very simple. Change always begins on common ground. Just recently, I was in Washington, D.C., and I was spending a day with the CIA. They're going through a lot of changes, and so they said, John, we'd like to have you meet with 14 top leaders and have a long lunch, but then we would like you to address about 500 or 600 of our people that are kind of leading departments about all the changes we're going through and how leaders view change and how they handle change. And so it was a wonderful, wonderful time. But what I shared with them that day, I share with you. When change must occur, there's a temptation for us to look at differences. Well, if I change, this is going to be different, and this will be different. And what happens is differences tend to separate us. And what we do is when we want to see change accomplished, the first thing we want to do is we want to find common ground. What do we all agree on? Let's start there. Let's start on something that we can, let's find the 1% we agree on and let's give it 100% of our effort. That's the beginning of a successful change. A lot of times change never occurs because we find the 1% we disagree on and we give it 100% of our effort. Number 2, it prevents unnecessary conflict. This 101% principle really eliminates a lot of conflict. General Grant said, there never was a time, in my opinion, some way could not be found to prevent the drawing of a sword. Number 3, it reduces the odds of making enemies. Emerson observed, he who has 1,000 friends has not a friend to spare, while he who has one enemy will meet him everywhere. Number 4, it keeps something of value that could have been lost. When you practice this 101% principle, you really get to keep those things that you value and those people you value. In the paragraph in your notes, how many potentially rewarding relationships have you missed because you focused on the differences instead of the common ground? How many potential friends have slipped through your fingers? How many productive business associations have been forfeited? Former New York Yankees manager Joe McCartney observed, any manager who can't get along with a 400 hitter is crazy. Number 5, it helps you to feel good about your part of the relationship. The reason it helps you and I feel good about our part of the relationship is because we know we're doing our very best. I'm right now personally going through an issue in a relationship that is extremely difficult. Pretty much, I've got bad news for somebody that I care a lot about. And the only thing that gives me strength in this whole process, the only thing that gives me peace in this process is I know without question that I've given this effort 100%. I mean, I have not slighted it in any way. I've done my very best to make it work. Now, what I'm saying is, when you have done your very best to make it work, it doesn't always work. Isn't that true? We've all come up to the place where 100% wasn't enough. But when I walk away from a situation that doesn't work out good, and I know with integrity that I've given it my best shot, and that my motives have been right, and my effort has been total, I can walk away. Disappointed? Yes. But not devalued. because I gave that individual the very best that I could. Number 6, one more thing about the 100% principle. It enables you to make the best of difficult situations. The happiest people don't necessarily have the best of everything, they just make the best of everything. Adopting the 101% principle makes the best of every relational opportunity, and no one can be expected to do more than that. People principle number 19, the patience principle. The patience principle says the journey with others is slower than the journey alone. For the friendship of two, the patience of one is necessary. And the question that I must ask myself is, do I take others with me even when it's inconvenient? By the way, when I wrote this relationship book, I can tell you, sometimes when people look at an author, they think that the author writes those things which he or she really is good at. When I write, I have to have about 4 or 5 timeouts. Kind of like, excuse me, I'm writing this because I know it's true, not because I'm good at this. In fact, when I wrote the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, 6 of the 21 laws I don't do well at all. In fact, I would rate myself average or lower than average. 6 of them. In fact, that's one of the reasons why I know I have to have a team around me. Are you with me? Because I'm not good at them. In fact, if you think you're good at all of them, you need a therapist around you. You need a real friend that cares for you because you're in deep weeds. Well, it's also true about these relationship rules. And this one here, this patience principle, this whole issue of taking people on the journey, you have to understand, I flunk this. Okay? I'm not a patient person. When I was in school, what I hated more than anything else about school was review day, where the teacher would say, now tomorrow we're going to review our notes for the last 6 weeks because we're getting ready for a big test, and we'll review the notes so we can get ready for the test. And I'd raise my hand and say, do I have to come? And she'd say, of course you have to come. Why wouldn't you come? Because I took notes the first time. Excuse me? If I got it, do I have to come? And they always made me come. And I hated it. I'd say, here I am, sitting in the classroom, did my stuff on the front end, now I'm waiting for everybody on the back end. Hit the ball and drag Charlie, hit the ball and drag Charlie, hit the ball and drag Charlie. After a while, don't you just want to hit Charlie? This has been a hard one for me to learn. One of my leadership lessons as I learned about what leadership is I learned that leaders aren't the first to cross the finish line. They may be the fastest, but they reduce their speed so everybody else can cross the finish line with them. What leaders do and what leaders know is that the very fact that you're a leader is that you bring people with you. That's where the patience principle comes in. In your notes, I constantly cast vision for the people of my organization, and then I left them behind. Not a good thing for a leader. I had to learn to connect with people and develop patience. These are 2 critical steps in relationship building. Patience without connection, and the relationship lacks energy. Connection without patience, and the relationship lacks potential. Connection with patience, the relationship has energy and potential. And if you want relationships to last, you need both energy and potential. So how do you become more patient in relationships? Number 1, prioritize patience as a virtue worthy of developing. In fact, Aristotle said, the greatest virtues are those which are most useful to other persons. Nothing is more useful to other persons than patience. Number 2, understand that it takes time to build good relationships. Number 3, practice the exchange principle. We've already talked about that. Instead of putting others in their place, what do we say? Put yourself in their place. To develop patience, you need to appreciate other people, how they think, and be sensitive to how they feel. Every person thinks his problems are the biggest, his jokes are the funniest, his prayers should get special attention, his situation is different, his victories are the most exemplary, and his faults should be overlooked. That's just how we are. Number 4, realize that people have and create problems. When it comes to people, there are good news and there's bad news. The good news is that some people in your life are going to be the source of your greatest joy, and the bad news is that those same people may be the cause of your greatest problem. That's true not only at home, but also at work. And the higher you climb in leadership, the more difficult the problems. The findings of leadership experts Warren Bennis and Bert Nannis bear this out. They state, what we have found is that the higher the rank, the more interpersonal and human the undertaking. Our top executives spend roughly 90% of their time with others and virtually the same amount of time concerned with the messiness of people problems. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Number 5. Identify areas where people need patience with you. Oh my goodness. Now this has helped me a lot. I'll pass this on to you because it's amusing to me, but it's really helped me a lot. Because I have a problem with patience with others, one of the things I have done is I have gone to people who love me the most, my inner circle, and I've asked them to give me ways that they have to be patient with me. Now we go to the synergy, the highest level of relationships, where we have to ask the question, can we create a win-win relationship? 4 people principles. Number 22, the boomerang principle. When we help others, we help ourselves. Or as Andrew Carnegie said, no man becomes rich unless he enriches others. The question I must ask myself is, do I experience a return when I help others? Too many times people approach life like a slot machine. They want to put as little in as possible and hopefully get a lot in return. There are 3 types of people I've noticed. There are, number 1, takers. Now, takers receive and never give. Many people focus on themselves and rarely go out of their way to do anything for others, and such people are takers. They worry only about what they can get, and they're never satisfied. Then there are traders. Receive and then give. Some people focus on keeping score. They are willing to give, but their primary motivation isn't to help others. They see relationships as an exchange. Often they give because they think they owe something to someone who has helped them, and they desire to make things even. Number 3, investors. They give and then receive. In the 3rd group, people focus on others. They give first and then they receive something if something is offered in return. They believe that success comes from being helpful, caring, and constructive. They desire to make everything and everyone they touch better, and they understand that the best way to accomplish that is to give of themselves. Ironically, by possessing an agenda to give first, they are the ones who most often experience the synergy of a win-win relationship. So what do investors do? 1, they thank others first. And 2, they don't expect short-term gain. And number 3, they invest in people with potential. Let me just stop here for a moment. In 1995, I spent 6 months making a list of 10 people that I would invest in. It took me quite some time to settle in on those that I should really do this with. To be honest with you, I took a spiritual route and I did some prayer. But I also just tried to observe and tried to find people that I especially thought had greater potential than me, that if I would serve them and if I would just invest in them, the return would be pretty huge. And I determined that I would never tell them that they were on my list. I would just invest in them. I can tell you, I started that in 1995. The list has somewhat changed. Of the 10 that I started off with, there are 4 still on the list. But through the process of time, some I helped for a period of time, and then I felt that I had invested in them as much as I could to help them in the areas that I could help them in, and many of them have gone on to do just tremendous things. And so I would add, as I would drop one off, I would add another one. 10 people. They to this day don't know. They never will. The satisfaction is in me knowing that I'm giving, expecting nothing in return. And then as I watch them do well, the reward is amazing. Now, they're not doing well just because of my investment. In fact, to be honest with you, most of them are very confident they would do well without my investment. But they're doing better because of my investment. And I know that. That's what I'm talking about in this whole issue of investing in people. If you do those 3 things, think of others first, don't expect short-term gains, invest in people with potential. Number 4 is bound to happen. You will enjoy a return in due season. That's a fact. Poet Edwin Markham wrote, "There is a destiny that marks us as brothers. No one goes his way alone, and all that we send into the lives of others comes back into our own." People principle number 23 is the friendship principle. And the friendship principle says, all things being equal, people will work with people they like. All things not being equal, they still will. Thoreau said, "The most I can do for a friend is simply be his friend." And the question that I must ask myself, am I a friend to the people I work with? There are 4 levels of business relationships. As soon as you understand the way that relationships affect business, you begin to realize that all business relationships are not created equal. As I have studied the subject, I have focused and I have discovered that there are 4 levels. Number 1 is people knowledge. Your understanding of people helps you build your business. In the introduction of this book, I discussed the importance of people skills and business relationships. They are absolutely essential to success. All the product knowledge in the world won't help someone without people skills, nor will technical expertise, nor will the ability to build a brilliantly efficient organization. If individuals don't possess people skills, they very quickly hit a ceiling in their effectiveness. People knowledge. But number 2 is service skills. Your treatment of people helps build your business. Barry Gibbons, the author of This Indecision is Final, maintains, between 70 and 90% of decisions not to repeat a purchase of anything are not about product or price. They are about some dimension of service, of the service relationship. Number 3 is business reputation. Your reputation for relationships helps you build the business. Howard Hodgkin said, "Whatever business you're in, you are in the business of relationships. That's why your reputation is your greatest asset." And then number 4, personal friendship. Your friendship with others builds your business. The highest level of business relationships is reached when people like your business, but more important, they like you. When there's a heartfelt personal connection to another person, it becomes stronger than any other kind of business bond. That's why I say, all things being equal, people will work with people they like, and all things not being equal, they still will. Friendship is the difference maker. During the war in Vietnam, General William Westmoreland was reviewing a platoon of paratroopers, and he would go down the line and ask them the same question: how do you like jumping? And they would say, love it, sir. And he just got the same greatest experience of my life, sir. And he just kept getting these wonderful positive things about parachuting. And he came down the line and finally came to a soldier and asked him the question, how do you like jumping? And he said, I hate it, sir. And then the general said, well, then why do you do it? And he said, because I want to be around the guys who do it, sir. It's the whole relationship factor. All things being equal. People will do business with people they like. All things not being equal, they still will. Number 24. People principle number 24. The partnership principle. Working together increases the odds of winning together. Or as tiny Mother Teresa said, you can do what I cannot do, and I can do what you cannot do. Together we can do great things. And the question you must ask yourself, are others better off because of their partnership with me? And my journey to understanding the partnership principle begins like this. Number one, I want to make a difference. Like many people, I started out in what I call the self stage. My focus was on me and what I could do. That's not to say I was doing anything wrong. My motives were positive. It's just that my perspective, along with my effectiveness, was so limited. Then I went to stage two. I want to make a difference with people. When I began to look at myself, I discovered that I could go farther and achieve more when others joined me on their journey. And as a result, I wanted to take everybody with me. It didn't take long for me to realize that was a mistake, and here's why. Not everyone should take the trip. Passion. Have you ever worked with people who said that they were on board with you and believed in what you were doing to accomplish, yet you kept having to talk them into doing their part? Those people have no passion for their work. They may want to take the ride, but they have no interest in pedaling. Take them on and you will wear yourself out. Not everyone wants to take the trip. That deals with attitude. Some people just don't believe in you or what you're doing. That doesn't mean you're wrong, or it doesn't make them wrong. It just means you shouldn't try to take them with you. Not everyone can take the trip. Ability. The difference between a partnership, oh, this is a great statement. The difference between a partnership and a rescue mission is capacity. Some people may want to make a difference, but they have no ability to affect what you're doing. You cannot afford to partner with someone with who there is no fit. The main lesson I learned during this phase is that I should try to build relationships with everyone, but I should forge partnerships with only a few. So I've gone from I want to make a difference to I want to make a difference with people to number 3, I want to make a difference with people who want to make a difference. English statesman Henry Van Dyke observed, in the process of personality, first comes a declaration of independence, then a recognition of interdependence. Number 4, I want to make a difference with people who want to make a difference doing something that makes a difference. Only at this stage in my life have I entered what I call the significant stage. I have many rewarding relationships, partnerships, and together we are doing many things that are making a positive impact by helping others. I can't imagine anything more rewarding. Rabbi Harold Kushner remarked, the purpose of life is not to win. The purpose of life is to grow and to share. When you come to look back on all that you have done in life, you will get more satisfaction from the pleasure you have brought into other people's lives than you will from the times that you outdid and defeated them. I believe that to be true. Not too long ago, about 10 years ago, I crossed an important line in my life, where one day I awakened to the fact that the success of others and what I can contribute to their success is more meaningful to me than my own personal success. That's the day that I changed my definition of success. And I began to understand that success for me is not personal success, but success for me is adding value to others and watching them be more successful. Now, what I understand about this journey, and what I understand about partnership is very simple. Life is very short, and it's difficult to accomplish significant things without others. So the quicker you and I understand the value of partnership,